All right. So CEO Zones is all about bringing the billion-dollar CEO and larger and those professional directors together. We do call it a sanctuary, not a community, because most people in that environment aren't looking for another contact. They come in, and as I like to say, they get what they want and they get out. And then we ask them, well, what value do you get? And out of every member I ask, they get something different out of the sanctuary. We have one user, I don't see him, nope. Uh, he only uses our AI platform, doesn't even know that people are in there, doesn't even know that he could talk to a member if both members agree to it. Doesn't have a clue that we have full content around AI for the C-suite, boardroom, governance from several different experts around that, Susan. And I'm looking at Susan just because she's the one I don't know, everybody. And then we have a presentation coming up. All right, Terry, that's my
I'm not
signal,
being, no,
Susan.
no, it's not a cue. I'm not being rude. I'm just
Yeah,
quickly
yeah, no,
setting
no,
up my
no.
screen.
That's how
setting,
Terry can
I'm
say, Bill,
setting up
you've
my
had your
screen.
time. So
No, Paul, no,
enough about that. Let's jump right
no.
in. Terry from South Africa, this is your day. Or no, this is your life. Is that how that goes? I'm old. This is your life.
Is that a formal introduction to me to now start talking, Bill?
Who are you? Where do you live? You go
Okay.
for it.
I
Yeah.
thought you, Bill, I thought you were doing a fabulous job. Yeah, well done, Bill. I know you've been our neck of the woods. I'm still trying to get out to your side, but
Yep.
it's always such a pleasure to spend time with you and to the colleagues here. And I'm delighted to present once again on this platform. A little bit about myself. I've been, in the years gone by, I was an executive in the banks for 18 years, local and international. Um, I discovered a new life. I then went to IBM and I headed up the thought leadership in the financial services of IBM. I did that for a few years. And then I saw the light again. And then I think governance came calling me. I don't think any reasonable, sane person would go looking for governance, but governance came looking for me. And I've been in this space now for governance for just over 23 years. So now this is now I suppose my proper career. So I've had kind of three careers all in one. But this is really, I think, where I enjoy my time the most. And I find that, this is something that I'm really passionate about. I hope it'll come through in the presentation. And yeah, we've done a lot of research into all these different types of topics, and then we've also created what we think the claim of others could be the world's first digitized governance framework, which is not what we're going to talk about today. I will make maybe a reference to that a little bit later in this discussion because it does have bearing. But yes, we can see the governance activity and the maturity of governance on a almost an instantaneous basis across the entire organization, strategically and operationally, and when we're then able to compare it retrospectively to what the company was doing a day before, and then we're able to compare it to any other organization using the same systems anywhere in the world, regardless of jurisdiction. And that changes behavior. I'm sure you can appreciate that. So that's just a little bit about my background. Yeah. So, Bill, thank you again for the opportunity to talk to you about, and the good folk today, about this kind of elephant in the room, CEOs who resign without reason. And just to give some background perhaps to this particular topic, about 2 or 3 months ago, I kind of noticed that there are quite a few CEOs resigning, and they're resigning not necessarily giving the full reason for that resignation. Now, I think before I start the presentation, I should perhaps just give a couple of maybe disclaimers, because I think the disclaimers are necessary. And the first disclaimer would be that, you know, everybody has the right to employment, but also has the right to unemploy themselves. All right, in other words, to resign. Um, and I think at the end of the day, if we look at how a board is structured and the purpose of a board is not only to set the strategic direction of the organization, is also to ensure that it's got the right people to navigate the complexities of running a business. And that requires a good, strong leader, a CEO who kind of knows their, you know, their job, their function. So part of the disclaimer is going to be that we shouldn't confuse ourselves by maybe conflating the issue of removing a CEO who has not done a good job, as opposed to a CEO resigning and the board bulldozing the CEO into giving a particular reason for that resignation or removal, however it might be, and that particular response is more aligned to protecting the organization's interests, but not necessarily giving the truth. I hope that makes sense. It reminds me of an article that one of my partners wrote about 2 or 3 years ago. And she wrote this article on the basis of trust versus honesty. And at first, when I looked at the article, I got to be honest, I was a little bit confused, thinking that trust and honesty were one and the same thing. It turned out that after I'd read the draft article at the time 3 or 4 times, which would not be the first time I've read an article 3 or 4 times to understand it, I very quickly realized, even as a child, that we would have told our parents only a certain part of the truth. And what we told our parents was indeed parts of that truth, but we didn't give the full picture. And by not giving the full picture, that essentially would kind of undermine the honesty behind the real story. And that probably brings me to the first slide around the disclaimer that all situations are different when people resign, particularly CEOs resign. And this could hold true not just for CEOs, but for other executives in the organization, even board members themselves. And these board members that I would refer to would be the non-executive directors. They've got the biggest vulnerability, perhaps, because they don't know necessarily what they ought to know. And when they start feeling uncomfortable, they resign. So the issue of whether it's a CEO resigning or it's a non-executive director resigning, the question, I guess, that I am battling to answer, and if I'm battling to answer that after 23 years of research in these very nuanced topics, I guess you might be battling with the same question, is where does our duty lie? Does the duty lie to protecting the organization no matter what? Because the organization in itself is a juristic body, it's an entity that in a sense is lifeless. And it's the directors, it's the board that actually breathes life into the entity. So if you've got this paradox type situation where you're expected in terms of your fiduciary duty to protect the organization, do you protect the organization in such a way, in such a manner that you're not telling the truth? And if you're not telling the truth and giving the whole story, how does that affect the organization, the reputation of the organization, particularly when the truth or the full honesty surfaces much later? And that's an issue as far as I'm concerned. All right. So I suppose, you know, before we get into these particular points that we see on the screen about it being a rising pattern and, little is being explained other than somebody has got better prospects and they've left because they were given better opportunities. We hear that all the time. We never ever hear the fact that there could have been a governance issue and that maybe was the reason for the resignation. So some leading questions perhaps that we need to be asking ourselves when these situations arise would be, why do CEOs resign? Well, sometimes why do these CEOs resign without an explanation? Is it okay to say that I have better prospects? I have resigned because there are better prospects, or I have resigned because I've got life challenges with my family. Now, some of those could be absolutely true. They could be completely true. But isn't it bizarre that we read the same kind of reasoning from one resignation of a CEO of one organization, completely unrelated to another organization, the CEO who has the same reason? What's the probability they've all got the same reason? Or what's the probability that the CEO has discovered something that they weren't told by the board? And we'll come to that in more detail as now. So yes, there is a rising pattern of resignations, and we're beginning to see more and more a trend that it's no longer a cyclical issue, but it's now perhaps arguably an issue because of increasing demands from stakeholders. I purposely don't say shareholders, but stakeholders. Shareholders are one component of that. So the increasing, demands of stakeholders, perhaps the type of activism that we see growing by the day. Could it also be the complexity that we expect the CEO to be able to navigate, but they haven't been properly trained in that navigation? What information are stakeholders when these things happen? What is the information that stakeholders are actually entitled to know? Surely stakeholders are in some manner an institutional investor. Now, I know that might sound a bit strange when I say that, but if you're buying products from an organization, the organization is dependent on your support. And therefore, if you're buying products from that particular organization, you are a stakeholder that needs to be invested in. And so if I talk about reputation, reputational damage, it's not just a reputational damage that comes from within the organization, but indeed a reputational damage that comes from outside the organization as well. So the pressing question to these unexplained departures are, what did the board actually do to carefully balance the departure of that CEO? And the carefully worded announcements, are we believing those announcements? If you're going to have a look at the listed companies, the stock exchanges, I don't think I've ever in 23 years seen that a CEO was removed or resigned for governance issues. Don't think I've seen it anywhere. And maybe you might want to put a little question down and Bill can look at the questions, because I really hope that this kind of agitates the thinking around, have you actually seen a CEO resigning or departing because of governance issues, and it's named? The next, probably before I leave this particular slide, is from an investor point of view. And let's face it, without investment, you haven't got a business. But from the investor's point of view, how do we balance confidentiality, or how do we distinguish perhaps confidentiality to transparency? How much is enough information? What are we expecting? And let's face it, the demands for increased disclosure, whether it is ESG reporting, whether it's annual reporting, your annual integrated report, looking at your corporate disclosures, the 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 kind of the expectation is becoming more and more frequent, more and more demanding, and more transparent. Now, as an example, in South Africa, executives at the most highest level, and now I'm talking about the C-suite, as well as another entity which you won't understand in the US. We call it in South Africa a prescribed officer. Now, a prescribed officer is a person who is not a director, but also has the means to influence some kind of change in the organization, which is of a material nature. We now need to disclose every iota of money that that person is earning month by month. Now think about that. And I'm going to deviate just for a second. I want to know by the rand or by the cent, by the dollar, all right, in American terms. I want to know by the dollar how much money you're earning, bonuses included, and I want you to separate it for me. That is a level of transparency that is now becoming more expected. It might be a bit ahead of your curve right now in the US, disclosure, privacy, etc., etc., but already in South Africa, which you can almost call precedence has been set. We demand to see every dime. Now that has its own nuances, okay? But that, I hope, explains the level of detail, the level of transparency. Now, if I'm looking for the transparency on how much you're earning, not just the board of directors, but also the lower levels, the prescribed officers, if that is the level of transparency that I want to have in your reporting, why do I not have the same level of transparency when you resign or when you were fired? I hope that makes sense. So we see all the time, and it's not kind of exclusive to one country and not to another. All the time we see the same kind of messages. It's this kind of, we've left for personal reasons. We've left by mutual agreement. Well, that one's quite different because the mutual agreement is more than likely the fact that there had been some kind of standoff between the board, the chairman of the board, and the CEO. And so I think what's important to say, particularly to this kind of quiet departure, is there's something that you see visibly, but there's also something that's not so visible. It's actually invisible. So the visibility part of this event is the actual resignation or the departure of the CEO. What's much less obvious, in fact, it is invisible, is the chain of governance decisions, the expectations, whether or not there was oversight in the decisions that were taken, and the behaviors that precede it. That is probably more important than the actual resignation itself. So if we were actually to understand the real reasons of a CEO resigning or departing, how might the stakeholders, and of course the shareholders, how would the stakeholders respond? And that, of course, it kind of brings on a whole new discussion around lost value in the organization, and of course the organization itself becoming unstable. And so we come back to that earlier question that I posed, is how much is enough information? Um, the difference between being truthful in some of the facts and being honest in the story. What's that balance? And I don't suggest, or certainly I don't, I'm not, it's not suggesting, well, yeah, that is the right line of thinking. I'm not suggesting that it is one of one or one of the other. It is a fine balance. And at the end of the day, we need to be protecting the organization in a managed, balanced way, particularly with such sensitivities of losing the leader of the organization, because that's what we're talking about. All right. So these statements are all accurate, but none of them actually explain why. And I think that is going to become increasingly more important, critical, particularly for institutional investors, particularly for the kind of stakeholders that love your brand, love your product, your services, and have stuck with you for all these years. And as soon as you start getting this wobbly kind of situation where you're not giving enough information, you're likely to lose the support of the shareholder and the stakeholder. So what does the departure itself look like without an explanation? And it's interesting because we speculate. We speculate a hang of a lot. And often the speculation itself is worth more than the truth. Worth more than the truth. Oh, we think the person resigned because of this, or we think the person resigned because of that. And the CEO actually leaving and kind of looking back and looking at what the headlines are saying, they're shaking their head and they're saying, well, it was none of that. But they realized that they were muzzled, not being able to give the real motivation or reasons for that departure. And that would have come clearly from the board. All right. So it requires a lot of reflection on the process before I get into the system, the process. And the process would be, assuming I was to be approached to become a CEO of your organization, what am I in the process? What am I letting myself into by potentially joining your organization? Are you the nomination committee or the chairman, whoever is responsible for doing the high level interviewing of the CEO? Are you being completely truthful with me before I sign my letter of appointment? Do I know whether or not the governance itself and the governance processes, do I know if they're robust? Do I know where the red flags are? Should you, as the chairman of the board interviewing me, or the nominations committee, should you be showing me all the danger zones that I might, before I accept such appointment, say to you, I actually don't think I'm capable of doing this. It's actually out of my scope. It's out of my experience. I'd rather not accept the appointment. So the point I'm making here is, how transparent have we been when we onboarded the CEO? When we spoke about the manner of oversight coming from the board and how we would work with the CEO on the basis that they joined, of course. And of course, this presentation already shows that the CEO did join, and then suddenly the person now is going to be resigning. And the question is, why? It looks so good. It's a good CEO. He comes with a good pedigree. So the whole issue with the onboarding becomes absolutely vital for the CEO to understand what he or she is accepting from the word go. And then if they understand it and they've got good, reputation, good experience, the point is, why did they resign a year later? The speculation is rife. A good CEO wouldn't have stepped down a year later or left for whatever the reasons would have been. And so when you start delving further and further into this question of the CEO resigning without a proper reason, or the organization not managing the reasoning of that departure, the questions are going to come up to ask, was it an individual decision? Was it a governance issue that caused the departure? And now just couch it as a departure. Or was it just a simple natural leadership transition? And if I don't know what it is, I'm going to speculate, and I'm going to come up with other reasons that the organization and indeed the person departing actually don't want. Yes, Bill. I can see you there in the corner.
Okay, just for the audience and people that would get the replay and our sanctuary members, you're very focused on boardroom thought process. Please don't think that we don't worry about culture and the values and the
Precisely.
alignment and what's the vision and where could there be personal value disagreement with corporate values, and
100.
that ends up being a train wreck. So
Yeah,
just
quite right.
make sure that we get the whole picture. But I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I
No,
made
no,
about
no,
six
no, no,
notes
no.
on it and I
It's
thought we better just get that out there. So go right
no, no.
back to
That's
your expertise, Terry.
yeah, no, no, no. You're absolutely right, Bill. In fact, in the digitized governing framework, board culture is an element all on its own. So the culture, and let me give the negative of that. The culture in this organization is we never lie, or we let me put it the other way around. The culture in this organization is we never miss the targets. What is that saying to me before I sign the contract of employment? All right. Now, had the chairman said that to me in the beginning about culture, I probably wouldn't have accepted the position in the first place. All right. So, to this particular part of the presentation, we think that silence is neutral, but it's not. There is so much more going on, almost not behind the scenes, but in the scenes. It's playing out because you've given such a kind of short term, not short term, but short viewed response to the departure. But the market, the players, the stakeholders are coming up in the same at the same time with all their own reasoning to that departure. And so there is a reputational cost. Warren Buffett said many years ago, which I'm going to amend as I remember it. He said, the reputation of an organization takes 20 or so years to build. At the time, he then went further on to say that when you think about the time period of building the reputation, and that it would take 5 minutes, he said, to destroy it. He said, maybe you would think differently about your actions in the organization. Well, today, a number of years later, I changed the 5 minutes to nanoseconds. You can destroy your organization's brand credibility, reputation in nanoseconds by one simple announcement. We agreed to separate on mutual grounds, mutual terms. Nanoseconds. Hits LinkedIn. All right. So there's a lot to be said in terms of the so-called neutrality. We left on good terms. I don't think those separations normally are on good terms, unless I was 90 years old, had spent my 60 of those years in the same organization, had delivered, and I was an ace CEO. That's different. All right. Right. So the resignation, as I say here in the slide, is actually more of a signal of the processes and the system in the organization rather than a signal about the person themselves. Now, let's quickly go back and let's just quickly think about this. A good board wouldn't employ a bad person. Are you okay with that statement? A good board, we would expect, okay, wouldn't employ a bad person. When they employ that person, they go to the media and they say what a great person they've employed. All right. A year later, we have separated on mutual grounds. What is that telling us? So here we start questioning the actual system. I alluded to this now. I meet the chair. I go for an interview. I go for my psychometric testing. So let's not forget about that too. And that is an intense process, and I make it. What else in the system is not working? Maybe we've already got succession planning there, and Bill, there's your culture view as well. Maybe we've already got board oversight, and we've got strategic alignment. What do we mean by strategic alignment? Just so we can quickly unpack that. Here I'm talking about, are we on the same page as firstly the shareholders to the board to the CEO and to the executive. Are we on the same page? Are we pulling in the same direction? And this then starts to question another issue, and that's, are our purposes, respective purposes, are they aligned? Most times they're not. So the objective and the purpose of the shareholder are different to the board, are different to the CEO, are different to the executive, and are different to the operations. And when that happens, you can see how the culture goes all over the show. And then what looks good on paper, we've got a succession management plan, we've got culture, we've got ethos, we've got strategy, we've got policies, we've got codes, we've got, all the governance artifacts, right? We've got them all there, but it's not talking. And it's certainly not showing an alignment between the CEO and what the CEO is expected to do. In many instances, it's not even codified in the CEO's appointment, because that's a record. So we don't codify what we really expect from the CEO in the actual record of appointment. We daren't put it in that appointment letter. Neither do we put it into the KPIs, because these are all hard evidence records. So it's really important that these particular components that I just touched on, a few of them here, are all aligned, and that there is no misalignment between the expectations of the board and the expectations of the CEO. So this brings me to the governance framework, because it's an ecosystem, and many people still don't see governance as an ecosystem. They kind of see it still as rules based. And maybe we need to be talking a combination of rules versus culture versus principle, because they're all different components of that ecosystem. And when a CEO joins an organization for the very first time, let's be honest, what do they really know about, firstly, what is expected of them, truthfully, what's expected of them? What do they know about what's happening in the organization? And then when they join and now arrive on day one, how do they actually understand the history of the organization that would either make them feel comfortable or uncomfortable, that over a period of time, while they can't fix it because they're not getting support from the board, they ultimately give an ultimatum and resign. So that just touches a little bit on the digitized governance framework, but I want to come in from a slightly different angle. The digitized governance framework does not just align all these governance artifacts for the whole eco suite to understand. The board must understand it in the same way that the CEO must understand it, and the executive and the workers in the organ must all understand it. But it also gives, if you will, a record of what was before I arrived, what's happening as I stay as a CEO, and if you decide to remove me, or I decide to resign, no matter the reasoning, what does it look like after I've left? I need a record of my CEO directing style after I've left using the same digitized governing framework. Now, without that kind of digitization, none of this happens. You'll come in as a CEO, you'll hopefully do a good job, and for one or other reason, you'll either resign or you'll be asked to leave. The issue is, what record do you have about the good job that you did? So if you say to me, well, you are asking me to leave for reasons that we're not going to make public because you believe I didn't do my job correctly, where is that record of the fact I didn't do my job correctly and therefore you're asking me to resign or you're removing me? Where's the record? Ladies and gentlemen, there isn't a record. And you will not find the record in the minutes. You will not find the record in the different meetings. You will not find that record in the annual reports. You certainly won't find it in the financials. So we get back to the point, transparency. Now, when I think about transparency, it would be remiss not to include what I call the ICRAFT acronym. It's not on the slide, but just quickly make a note of it. ICRAFT. You see, when you're protecting the organization, all 6 of these components need to be at play and balanced. And I'll quickly go through it with you, quickly off the top of my head. I for integrity. Do you, as an individual, as a CEO, as a chairman of the board, as whoever it is, as an organization itself, do you have integrity? Is there competence? And the competence would talk to the reason why the CEO leaves or is removed. Are you being responsible? Before we get to transparency, are you being responsible? How is accountability being measured? Who's measuring it? Is there fairness in the system? And finally, transparency. So that is the makeup of iCraft. So you would know that outsiders, I'll call them outsiders, are not just looking at transparency, they're also looking at the accountability, the responsibility factors as well. And in legal doctrine, there's something called Turquoise, the Turquoise rule, the Turquoise law. And it allows me, as an outsider, who may be speculating why you resigned as a CEO, that says, I, as an outsider, can reliably depend, sorry, I can reliably depend on the fact that you as a board, you as a CEO, follow due process. I don't have to check that. I can rely on it as a legal doctrine. It's called Turquoise. And so when you're giving me bits and pieces of the truth, have you actually done what was expected of you as both the organization, because the organization is an entity in its own right, as well as the board in the organization, and of course the executive. Right, so process becomes very important. So you land up with 2 types of situations, and I'll just cut to the chase on this particular slide. The organizations that are honest, are truthful, about whatever the situations are. Not to say that you've got to give all the information away. All right. Those are the organizations that will lock in the confidence of the informed investor stakeholder. They will lock in the confidence of those people. Now, let me just make a point on this. Your organization might be wired into a digitized governing framework where you, as the board and the management, can see the real time performance of governance of the organization. Let's assume that today your entire framework is giving you 56% compliance to any artifact, any governance artifact. You're getting 56%. Well, it's not very good. But I'm going to be transparent about that, and I'm going to put it into my reporting. And I'm going to tell the board. So I'm going to tell the board what the challenges are. Compared to another organization, and we've got a few of these in South Africa, who says we are, quote unquote, 98% compliant with all our governance artifacts. How do you test that? Number one. And secondly, does anybody believe that? That was running for 3 years on the trot. 3 years on the trot. Quickly, governance artifacts. In other words, you're compliant to all the laws that are applicable to your particular organization, remembering that some laws don't apply to other organizations. You're compliant with all your codes, your policies, your procedures. You're compliant with strategy. Your strategy is aligned to all the governance artifacts, and your operations are working to making sure that all that's fulfilled. On top of that, you're saying to me that all the lines of defense, the internal auditors, the external auditors, the regulators, they've all checked and they agree that you're 98% compliant. Do you believe that? Not a chance. Not a chance. So you can see the two types of environments here. The one environment that gets supposedly 56% compliance, and it's gone through all the hoops and the bells and the whistles, and it is true that they are 56% compliant, compared to another organization that claims it's 98%. Now let's put that into CEO resignation terms. On the one hand, I'm going to give a balanced message, which is closer to honesty. But in the other message, I'm simply going to say we've parted ways because we've got misaligned values. I had a case just a couple of months ago. The CEO said to me, and in fact, he didn't just say it to me, he said it publicly as well. And you can go and check it out. I'm not going to mention the name. You're going to have to go and do a little bit of sleuth work. But he said publicly, I'm no longer confident that I can actually lead this organization. Now, let's just play on that for a minute. With that kind of message, even though the individual may have been paid millions of dollars to leave, and he probably doesn't have to work for the rest of their life, her life. The question is, in 6 months' time, if you did not manage a proper disclosure with the separation, and you said, I've left because I have bigger fish to fry. And now I'm arriving at your organization 6 months later. And you say, well, what exactly did you mean by you've got bigger fish to fry? Can you please explain that? In fact, would you mind getting the past chairman to corroborate the bigger fish to fry? What does that mean? You see, the departure doesn't end when you've left that particular organization. The departure stays with you. So, Bill, perhaps that gives you more of an idea of what this topic is about. It's an elephant in the room because somehow, Bill, we've got to try and balance that message, and it's not an easy act. We've got to be able to protect what we need to protect in terms of the organization, but at the same time, we've got to be able to give sufficient information that is truthful, that is going to give the necessary assurance to the stakeholders in respect of the departure. So to the point I made this now, your accountability survives the resignation. Let me explain what I mean by that. After you've left, you will have to explain somewhere, somehow. You'll have to explain, maybe even to your grandchild. But a point that I think a lot of us miss is in the departure, while you've lost your title and whilst you've lost your authority in that organization of which you departed from, your accountability stays with you. If you lied or they lied and it comes out later, what's going to happen? Your accountability, the liability, never leaves you. I smile when I say that because a couple of days ago, I had a CEO saying to me, Terry, we're concerned about what's going on and we're worrying about iCraft. iCraft, remember iCraft? Integrity, competence. So I said, well, how do you protect yourself? They said, no, every single meeting, every board meeting, every board pack, and all the supporting evidence, I take a copy of and I take it home. I store it in my garage. Well, what does that say about trust? What does it
And,
say about I've now left your organization on whatever terms? I don't trust you maybe, but I'm also worried that liability because I've got no proof of how I ran the organization as a CEO. So therefore I better collect the truth. And you know that that clawback, I'm not talking necessarily the financial clawback only, but the liability that follows you stays with you. And so when you resign because the board did not support you, isn't that closer to the truth than frying bigger fish? And so that probably leaves us, as I wrap up now, with a closing reflection. And I'm going to leave you perhaps with two thoughts. The first thought would be perhaps the greatest governance challenge is not explaining why a CEO has resigned. It is whether the governance system produced sufficient objective evidence that stakeholders never needed to rely solely on that explanation in the first place. The next thought I'd like to leave with you is this. If governance is intended to provide confidence, which indeed it's supposed to be doing, why do we still depend so heavily on carefully crafted narratives instead of independently verifiable evidence of that departure? Well, I think on that note, that might be a good place to hand back over to you, sir. I thank you for indulging me this time and to explain a topic that is very close to my heart. I didn't mention this just now, but I think I did. I'm not sure if I did. I can't remember. When I put the original post out, I had how many? 47? No, 44. No, 94. I forget the number now. I've gone blank. 94,000 hits. You can go and check it out. Okay, no, not to worry.
my fault.
So I hope you got the two closing thoughts, the two closing reflections. But Bill, back to you now, maybe just
Yep.
to wrap up and to talk about the other events that we'll be having in the weeks ahead. Thanks,
Oh,
Bill. Over to you.
thank you, Terry. So I trust everybody learned something new, but when you're learning, one of the things that CEO zones would be, what are you going to implement should be written down and in your calendar by now, not about 5 minutes from now, or it'll get lost. So that would be one thing. This is one of 3 series where Terry is going to share different topics with us on August 5th at 11 Eastern. It'll be around compliance or the competitive advantage that a board should have. Then on August 19th, it's around the boardroom, and this is my personal pet peeve. Do I really get anything from a board? What is the performance, and how do I know what I'm getting that's giving me value? And why would I pay a board of director? And well, I better not use a number because I know some of you are with nonprofits, but why would I pay a board of director money, whether it be $1 or whatever it might be, and not feel that I'm getting value as the CEO, even though the relationship, some board of directors feel the relationship is very dictatorial towards the CEO vice versa, especially if they're not an owner, founder, chairman, CEO. There's that extra dynamic there. So we're going to dig into on August 19th around boardroom performance and how do we really know we're giving it. Next Wednesday, it'll be my pleasure to share with whoever can show up and would like to know more about our CEO AI legacy platform. And we're actually going to share for the first time, we're going to rip off the Band-Aid and go from total seclusion and only our members are allowed to see it and use it to actually give you a demo, what we call Chief of Staff AI Advisor. And that, just to give you a little tidbit, it can do things like before your board meeting next week, you load your materials and have a digital presence of the actual board members role play with your chief administrative officer so that when you go to the board meeting, those little questions like, I'm going to pick on Susan since now I realize who you are, Susan. Thank you so much. I don't know why I had a great grandfatherly mind moment. And then I went on LinkedIn and went, oh, Bill, you're an idiot. But anyway, thank you so much for being here. But
My pleasure.
that great grandfatherly moment where we literally have the tool that we've hidden and only allow multi-billion-dollar CEOs and generals in the military are like, for instance, John Gronsky. He had, I think, around 20,000 troops under his control. So he had billions of dollars on what I'll call his P&L. So we do have sanctuary members that are flag officers. I don't think we have any. They might have been less than a flag officer, but now they're a CEO if that's their case, like myself. But anyway, thank you so much. So July 29th at 11 is the Chief of Staff AI Advisor. That's my notice that I need to shut up. On August 5th, we have compliance or competitive advantage. And on August 19th, it's the real performance of the board, which, Terry, I'm going to look forward to interrupting you on the 19th and sticking you a bit with my little knife. But don't worry, I carry Band-Aids after each stabbing. Anyone have any questions that we could answer live? Because during the replay, you don't get the privilege of asking Terry real questions. Okay. Susan, I have a question for you. I am meeting with Julie Germany at the Army Heritage Center Foundation. Are you friendly with Julie today?
No, I don't know Julie.
Okay. All right.
Because remember, I was Air Force, Bill.
Yeah, well, so was I. But
Okay.
but so do you happen to know Major General John Gronsky?
I do, yes.
Okay, he's a dear friend.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, we've been known to eat oatmeal together on Thursdays. So okay.
I do have one quick follow-up question for Terry.
Sure.
Terry, your final two takeaways. The first one, I don't think they were written down. By the way, I love your presentation style because I love that you didn't go through 50 PowerPoint slides. You had very nice presentation skills. But your first final takeaway, can you just repeat that? Because I liked it, I missed it, I didn't get to write it down.
What I'll do, because it's quite lengthy to write down and read out,
yeah.
I'll actually send those questions to Bill, and then Bill can push it out to everybody.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, then we don't have to waste time trying to write down.
Love it.
Yeah.
Or we might even have the technology. We'll see if Jeremy has a bird or we can't see Arturo, but we might even have the technology to just edit that right into the replay as well. Do both.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I'm just an old great grandfather that assumes we've got technology.
Arturo said, will
just
do.
Put in the chat, will do.
He's a miracle worker.
All right.
Bill?
Thank you all. We don't want to go over. Is there Clark, you got a question? You raise your hand. Oh, okay. I don't see anyone else off camera, so if you're raising your hand, I can't see you. Oh, I got a red button on the chat. Pardon me 1 second. It probably says, Bill, would you please shut up? Nope, it says Arturo. I'm on it. Okay. Thank you all. Have a wonderful, blessed day.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks,
Terry.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.